Your husband has been telling us you are too weak. He says you can't perform your wifely duties anymore. We can see how much you are struggling, so we have found a solution. The words felt like blows, each one slicing deeper than the last. The solution? Her mother-in-law added, as if delivering a gift. She can help you satisfy your husband's needs. There was once a woman who loved her husband with all her heart. They had been married for 8 years, and in that time, they had woven a life together full of joy, laughter, and dreams. Their two young children were the center of their world. Their laughter filled the home with warmth. To those who saw them, they seemed like the perfect family. But life has its way of testing the strongest bond, and soon their happiness would be threatened by an unexpected heartbreaking trial. It started with small signs. Her husband would come home exhausted, complaining of aches and fatigues. At first, she chalked it up to stress from work. After all, he worked hard to provide for them. But soon, the tiredness turned to pain and it became impossible to ignore. She remembers the helpless feeling that gripped her heart every time she saw him wince in pain. Every time he struggled to get out of the bed in the morning, the man she had once known as strong and full of energy was now a shadow of himself. Eventually, the truth came out. After several doctor visits, tests, and sleepless nights, they received the news that shook their family to the core. His kidneys were failing. Without a transplant, his life would be cut short. She sat beside him in the sterile, cold doctor's office, holding his hand, and they listened to the doctor's griming words. Her mind was filled with fear and worry. How could this be happening to them, to him, to the father of her children? She clung to his hand as if every touch could hold him to this world, as if her love alone could keep him safe and alive. His family, deeply shaken by the news, quickly stepped in. They were a wealthy family with the means to explore all options for a donor. They offered support both emotionally and financially, reassuring her that they would do everything possible to save him. But as they looked into possible matches, the doctors couldn't find one on time. Then the doctor said they could test each family members to see if they could get a match. A discovery was made. She, his own wife, was a perfect match. Her husband's family then turned to her, pleading with her to consider donating her kidney to her husband. They reminded her how much she meant to him, how much her children needed their father. Their words were kind, but she could feel the weight of their expectations. She could see the hope in their eyes, the quiet pleading that seemed to echo. Wouldn't she do it for him? After all, he is her husband. She then confided in her own family, hoping for their support. But instead, her family's response was one of concern, of fear of her well-being. Her younger sister, the one she was closest to, was the most vocal. Why does it have to be you? She asked. They have money, they have influence. Couldn't they find a donor? Her sister's words were a mix of worry and frustration, reflecting the tension that now hung over their family. Her mother too spoke up, gently urging her to consider the risks involved. But despite their plea, she had already made up her mind. This was her husband, the father of her children, the man she had pledged to stand beside through better or worse. If there was even a chance that she could sacrifice herself to save him, she was willing to take it. The day of the surgery arrived, and she laid in the hospital bed, waiting, her heart pounding with a mixture of fear and resolve. She closed her eyes, remembering the vows they had made to each other, remembering the countless moments of joy they had shared together, the laughter of their children, and the life they built together. With those memories grounding her, she found the strength to go through with the surgery. When she awoke after the surgery, the first thing she saw was her husband's face. He looked healthier already, a soft smile on his lips as he held her hand. She remembers how he looked at her in that moment. His eyes filled with gratitude and emotions. He told her he could never repay her, that he would stand by her, take care of her, just as she had taken care of him. He promised her that he would never forget what she had done for him. You have saved my life. I am going to love and cherish you for the rest of my life, he promised. In the months that followed, his health blossomed. He was like a new man, full of life and energy. To show his gratitude, he showered her with affections and surprises, little gifts, weekend getaways, family trips, and on and on and on. He went out of his way to make her feel cherished and loved. One evening, he came home with a banquet of her favorite flowers, a simple gesture that filled her heart with warmth. It seemed like their love was stronger than ever, a renewed bond born from the trials they had endured together. Her sacrifice felt worth it. She felt proud, content, knowing she had saved him. Her children had their father, and their home was once again filled with laughter and light. And she, despite the physical toll the surgery had taken, she was at peace, certain that she had made the right choice. But life, as it often does, had another twist in store. Only a few months later, she began to feel a strange weakness settling in, a persistent fatigue that wouldn't go away. She tried to ignore it, telling herself it was nothing, that she just needed to rest. But the fatigue worsened until one fateful day, she felt a sudden dizziness sweep over her. She barely had the time to call out before the world went dark. By the time she woke up, she was on the hospital bed, her younger sister by her side. Worry itched deep into her face. Her sister explained that she had fainted at home and she had been the one to bring her to the hospital. Concerned, her sister had called her husband multiple times, but he hadn't answered his calls. It was until hours later that he finally picked up. When he heard that his wife was in the hospital, he merely said he was busy and he wouldn't be able to come. As the hours passed, she waited for her husband, convinced that he would arrive at any moment. She watched the door, expecting to see his face, to feel his comforting presence, but he never showed up. Her younger sister, frustrated and dismayed, finally voiced what she herself had been trying to ignore. You gave up a part of yourself for this man, and this is how he repays you? Her sister's words struck a nerve, tearing something deep within her. She brushed off the thought, trying to reassure herself. He must have a good reason, she told herself. He is probably tied up at work, but a small seed of doubt had been planted in her. When she was finally discharged from the hospital, she went home, hoping for some kind of explanation from her husband. She walked into the house, expecting to find him worried, ready with open arms, but there he was, casually watching television, as if her absence had meant nothing at all. He barely looked up as she walked in, his expression indifferent. Taking a deep breath, she mustered the courage to ask him why he hadn't come to the hospital. His answer was a careless one, his voice distant, and he muttered something about work. When she pressured him further, hoping for an apology, for some sign that he cared, he grew irritated, his tone sharp and dismissive. Then, as if her pain were an inconvenience for him, he stood up and walked out, leaving her alone in the silence of their home. She sat down, feeling the weight of the empty room around her. The promise he had made, the words of gratitude he had once spoken, they now felt like distant echo fading into the past. She thought of all she had sacrificed, of the part of herself she had given to save him, only to find herself facing this cold indifference from him. As she lay in bed that night, her mind replayed each moment, each promise, each sacrifice she had given him, everything, believing in their love, in the life they had built together. But now, with every dismissive word, every indifferent gesture, she felt the pain. Reality setting in, she had poured her heart and soul into saving him, only to find herself alone, questioning if any of it had been real. That night, as she stared at the ceiling, a painful realization took hold. She had given up a part of herself for a man who, in the end, might never have truly cared. And for the first time, she allowed herself to wonder if she had made a terrible mistake. The wife's thoughts were tangled with pain and anger. After that day in the hospital, her sister's word echoed in her mind, making her question the reality of her husband's love. How could he turn so easily, so callously? He cared less about her now. She needed to know why. The next morning, she called her sister to talk to her about how her husband had suddenly changed towards her and grown distant. Her sister's response seemed as though she had been expecting this outcome. "I knew it," she exclaimed. "I told you, this man wasn't worth the sacrifice. Sis, let me tell you what you can do to confirm that he doesn't care about you one bit. Since the doctor said it's just malaria the other day, let's test him. Pretend to be really, really sick and see how your husband will react. I'm sure he will show you his true colors." So, the wife decided to test him. She began to act weak, growing quieter and slower, making herself appear drained and even helpless. She became someone who needed care, a woman recovering from surgery, worn out from life demands. She noticed his frustration bubbling to surface. Soon he was barely home, returning only at odd hours, sometimes not at all. And when he did show up, his words stung like daggers. He was always angry and finding fault in the smallest things, as though his new life outside the home gave him license to discard his family. The weeks passed and her suspicion grew stronger until one day the answer arrived, standing on her doorstep. She had been in the kitchen when she had a car pulled over, and soon after, her husband's voice mixed with others. When she walked to the door, she saw him standing with his parents. and with them was a young woman she didn't recognize. Her stomach twitched, but she forced a smile and greeted them politely. Her father-in-law spoke first. His voice was steady but sharp, the tone of a man who had made a decision and expected you to obey. "Cynthia," he began, "your husband has been telling us you are too weak. He says you can't perform your wifely duties anymore. We can see how much you are struggling, so we have found a solution." The words felt like blows, each one slicing deeper than the last. "The solution?" Her mother-in-law added, as if delivering a gift. "She can help you satisfy your husband's needs and take care of things. It will be less of a burden on you." They spoke to her as if she were a broken object, something used and discarded. Their words delivered without compassion or regard for the sacrifice she had made. They made her feel like they were doing her a favor. She felt her heart cracking, the humiliation too deep to hide. But instead of breaking down, she nodded, a polite, tight smile masking the rage and devastation brewing inside her. The family walked into the house, showing the new woman around, and she followed them quietly. She watched as her husband's mother led this co-wife into her bedroom, casually pointing to different spots in the room as if giving her a tour. The co-wife, with a faint smirk, turned to her and said, "Oh, and you can move to the guest room." It was the final insult. The reality of her betrayal was glaring, undeniable, yet she kept her face calm. She left them there and retreated to the guest house, where she took a seat, staring at the wall as her mind raced. In that quiet place, her anger crystallized, turning into something more powerful, something that made her see clearly what she needed to do. If they thought she was weak, they were wrong. They had no idea what kind of strength lived within her. The strength that had given her husband life itself. And if he couldn't appreciate that life, she would be the one to take it back. She decided on a plan that would turn the tables. Thank you so much for listening to today's story. If you would want me to do a part 2 of the story, kindly type it in the comment section saying I want part 2. Thank you very much, and I am going to see you in my next story. Bye.